A ruthless biker gang walks into a diner, terrorizing everyone inside. Their leader, Jade, spots Keanu Reeves and laughs. "Just an actor? Bet you can't fight for real." But when Jade throws the first punch and Keanu counters with lightning-fast precision, the room goes silent. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The neon glow of the roadside diner flickered against the dark sky as Keanu Reeves pushed open the glass door. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, but something felt off. The place was small, intimate, the kind of diner where truckers and locals shared quiet conversations over late-night meals. But tonight, a thick tension clung to the room like a storm waiting to break. Keanu's boots made soft thuds against the linoleum floor as he stepped inside. A few scattered customers sat in their booths, their heads low, their gazes flickering nervously toward the long counter. That's where they were. The Iron Serpents, a notorious biker gang, draped in leather jackets marked with a menacing coiled serpent, had taken over the diner. Their presence was impossible to ignore. The loud, obnoxious laughter, the clatter of beer bottles against the counter, and the crude remarks tossed carelessly at Betty, the aging waitress who had been serving this town for over 20 years. Betty did her best to stay professional, refilling coffee cups with a forced smile, but the fear in her eyes gave her away. Keanu quietly slid into a booth in the farthest corner, away from the chaos. He didn't come here looking for trouble, just a hot meal and some peace. He nodded at Betty as she approached, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out her notepad. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked, her voice tight but kind. "Just a coffee, please," Keanu said, his tone calm, reassuring. She gave a small nod and hurried off, but not before glancing over her shoulder at the bikers. Among them sat Jesse, the youngest of the gang, his fingers fidgeting against his glass. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. He wasn't throwing insults or reveling in their power over this small town. He sat stiffly, his eyes darting between his gang and Keanu, as if silently urging them to stop. But Jade, the leader of the Iron Serpents, wasn't one to let a quiet evening pass. A cocky smirk spread across his face as he leaned back in his stool, eyes locking onto Keanu. "Well, well, well, look who just walked into our little club," he said, his voice thick with amusement. The other bikers turned and the laughter followed. "Hollywood's biggest action star," one of them cackled. "You doing research for your next role, Reeves?" another sneered. Keanu didn't react. He simply lifted his coffee cup as Betty placed it in front of him and took a slow sip, completely unfazed. Jade's smirk twitched. He didn't like being ignored. "You fight as good as you act, Reeves? Or is it all just camera tricks?" he goaded, pushing off his stool and strolling toward Keanu's booth. The diner fell deathly silent. Even the sound of the sizzling grill behind the counter seemed to disappear. Keanu remained still, his fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic of his coffee cup. He didn't rise to the bait, didn't flinch under Jade's looming presence. Instead, he glanced up with a calm, unreadable expression, one that had sent chills down the spines of countless villains on screen. But this was real life. Jade's pride wouldn't allow him to be ignored. He needed a reaction, something to prove he was in control. So, with a deliberately slow motion, he reached for Keanu's coffee. "Oops," he said mockingly as he tipped the cup forward, spilling the steaming liquid straight onto Keanu's lap. A collective gasp filled the room. Jesse inhaled sharply. Betty froze. The other customers sat on edge, watching, waiting. But Keanu didn't move. The burning liquid seeped into his jeans, but his expression never changed. He exhaled through his nose, placed his now empty cup back onto the table, and dabbed at his pants with a napkin. Calm, controlled, unreadable. Jade expected an outburst. He expected anger, maybe even fear, but this stillness, it unsettled him. Keanu finally looked up, his eyes meeting Jade's with quiet intensity. "That was unnecessary," he said, his voice low and even. Jade scoffed, masking the flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. "What's the matter, movie star? You gonna cry about it?" Keanu didn't answer. The air inside the diner had thickened, heavy with anticipation. The moments stretched, each second dragging out painfully slow. The bikers waited for Jade to do something, to escalate it further. Jesse shifted uncomfortably. "Jade, maybe just leave it." "Shut up, kid," Jade snapped without taking his eyes off Keanu. The room was waiting for Keanu to react, for a flicker of anger, for a challenge. Instead, Keanu pushed his chair back slowly, unfolding his long frame as he stood. He was taller than Jade had expected, his presence somehow growing as he rose to his full height. For the first time, a sliver of hesitation flickered in Jade's eyes. Keanu straightened his jacket and met Jade's gaze once more, his tone eerily calm. "You should sit back down," he said simply. Jade's fingers twitched at his sides, fists itching for a fight. The others around him grew quiet, their confidence shaken by the way Keanu carried himself, not as an actor playing a fighter, but as a man who had been in real fights. The tension in the room was unbearable. Betty took a shaky step forward. "Jade, just let it go," she pleaded softly. But Jade wasn't the type to let things go. His pride had been pricked, his authority challenged in front of his gang. And that was something he couldn't tolerate. A muscle in his jaw twitched as he let out a slow breath, then cracked his knuckles. He wasn't going to let Keanu walk away from this without proving a point. The fight hadn't started yet, but everyone in the diner knew it was coming. Keanu Reeves remained motionless, his posture relaxed but his gaze steady. His jeans were still damp from the spilled coffee, but he paid no mind to the sting of heat. The real fire was coming from the man in front of him. Jade, the arrogant leader of the Iron Serpents. "That was unnecessary," Keanu said, his voice even, calm. Jade grinned, enjoying the attention of his gang and the nervous energy filling the diner. "Come on, old man, do something." He shoved Keanu's shoulder hard, expecting to see him stumble, but Keanu barely moved. The room tensed. The other bikers chuckled, waiting for the Hollywood actor to embarrass himself. Keanu let out a slow breath, his patience wearing thin. He wasn't here to fight, but he had seen men like Jade before. Men who mistook cruelty for strength, who thought respect was something you took instead of something you earned. Jade's grin faltered when Keanu didn't react. The moment stretched painfully long, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, unable to handle the silence, Jade's pride took over. He swung. The punch cut through the air with force, aimed straight for Keanu's jaw. But it never connected. Keanu leaned back, just enough for Jade's fist to miss by inches. Gasps filled the diner. The bikers had expected a clean hit. Maybe they thought Keanu would stumble, or at least flinch. Instead, he stood there, his eyes locked on Jade's, unfazed. Jade's expression shifted, his cocky smirk replaced by something else. Annoyance? No, it was something deeper. Humiliation. He clenched his fists. No way was he letting some washed-up actor make a fool of him. He threw another punch, faster, harder. Keanu caught Jade's wrist mid-swing. The diner went silent. Jade's eyes widened as Keanu's grip tightened. Before he could react, Keanu twisted his wrist sharply, forcing him off balance. In one swift motion, Keanu swept his leg out from under him. Jade hit the floor hard. A deep groan of pain left his lips as he lay sprawled on the linoleum. The sound of the impact echoed through the diner, ringing louder than any of his previous taunts. Nobody moved. The Iron Serpent, loud, rowdy, aggressive just moments ago, sat frozen in shock. Betty covered her mouth, her wide eyes darting between Keanu and the biker leader now groaning at his feet. Jesse, still seated with his gang, muttered under his breath, "That wasn't luck." Keanu calmly stepped back, releasing Jade's wrist. "You should leave now," he said, his voice carrying no malice, just a simple fact. Jade's chest rose and fell rapidly, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had underestimated Keanu. No, he had miscalculated everything. But pride was a dangerous thing. Jade wasn't just angry, he was furious. With a growl, he scrambled back to his feet, shaking off the pain in his wrist. His gang members exchanged uncertain glances, waiting for his next move. "You'll regret this, Reeves," Jade snarled, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think this is over?" Keanu remained still. "Walk away, Jade. It's done." But Jade wasn't listening. He was seeing red. He lifted his hand and gave a sharp signal. The air shifted. 4 bikers shot up from their seats, their heavy boots pounding against the floor as they charged. Keanu exhaled through his nose. So be it. The first biker swung a wild right hook, but Keanu sidestepped effortlessly, letting the man stumble forward. As he turned back, Keanu delivered a precise palm strike to his chest, sending him crashing onto a nearby table, knocking over silverware and condiments. The second one came in from behind, trying to grab Keanu in a chokehold. Wrong move. Keanu ducked low, grabbing the biker's arm and flipping him over his shoulder. The biker slammed onto the hard floor with a painful grunt, dazed. The third and fourth came together, thinking their numbers would give them the advantage. One of them lunged with a broken beer bottle, the jagged glass glinting under the fluorescent lights. Keanu stepped to the side and caught the biker's wrist, twisting it just enough to make him release the bottle before shoving him backward into his friend. The two crashed into a booth, knocking over plates and shattering glasses. The entire fight lasted less than 15 seconds. The Iron Serpents were now sprawled across the diner, groaning in pain, their pride shattered alongside the mess they'd created. Keanu straightened his jacket, not a single strand of hair out of place. The few remaining patrons stared in stunned silence. Betty let out a shaky breath, gripping the counter for support. She had worked in this diner for years, had seen countless fights break out, but never anything like this. Jade stood in the middle of the wreckage, his fists clenched at his sides, his breathing heavy with rage. He should walk away, but he wouldn't. Not yet. "You're gonna pay for that," Jade hissed, his voice laced with venom. He turned toward Jesse, who had been watching the entire fight with wide eyes. "Get up," he barked at the gang members still on the floor. Slowly, the bikers groaned and staggered to their feet, rubbing their bruises and glaring at Keanu with newfound wariness. Jade's pride wouldn't let this end here. Not in front of his gang. Not in front of the town that once feared him. "We'll see you again real soon, Reeves," he spat before turning to his men. "Let's go." The Iron Serpents shuffled toward the exit, their confidence bruised, their leader fuming. But Keanu knew this wasn't over. As the door slammed shut behind them, Jesse lingered for just a second longer, his eyes locked onto Keanu's. Unlike Jade, there was no anger in his gaze, just something close to admiration, and maybe a hint of fear. Then he turned and followed his gang into the night. Betty let out a slow exhale, her shoulders slumping with relief. "That was something," she murmured, shaking her head. "I don't think they've ever been handled like that before." Keanu sat back down, rolling his shoulders. "They'll be back," he said simply. Betty sighed. "Yeah, I know." Keanu lifted his coffee cup, then smirked when he remembered it was empty. Something told him he wouldn't be getting that quiet meal anytime soon. For a brief moment, silence filled the diner. The Iron Serpents stood frozen, eyes darting between their fallen members and Keanu Reeves, who hadn't even broken a sweat. The few remaining patrons gripped their coffee cups, watching with bated breath. Jade's lip curled in rage as he staggered to his feet, his pride taking an even greater hit than his body. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and turned to his gang. "What the hell are you all waiting for?" he barked. "Get him!" The spell was broken. One of the bikers, a burly man with a leather vest and a thick beard, lunged at Keanu first, swinging wildly. His sheer size should have made him an overwhelming force, but Keanu was faster. Keanu sidestepped, barely moving but shifting his balance just enough to let the biker's momentum carry him forward, straight into a wooden table. The entire diner flinched as the table cracked under the impact, plates and coffee cups shattering onto the floor. The biker groaned, stunned, his face buried in a pool of spilled ketchup and mustard. The second biker came in right behind him, a wiry man with a snake tattoo running down his forearm. He swung fast and hard, but Keanu ducked effortlessly. With precision, Keanu countered. His palm struck the biker's chest in a sharp, controlled blow. A loud oof left the man's lips as the force of the strike sent him stumbling backward, his lungs instantly devoid of air. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath. Betty gasped from behind the counter. She had seen bar fights before, but never anything like this. The third biker, young, jittery, and much less confident than the others, hesitated. He had just watched two of his crew get flattened in seconds. This wasn't how fights were supposed to go. They were the Iron Serpents. They won fights. And yet, Keanu stood there, composed, unshaken. Jade saw his hesitation and snapped. "What are you waiting for? Get him!" The third biker had no choice. He rushed in, trying to take Keanu by surprise. Keanu spun on his heel and delivered a clean, precise kick to the ribs. A sickening thwack echoed through the diner. The biker doubled over, collapsing onto his knees, coughing violently as pain radiated through his side. He wouldn't be standing up anytime soon. The fourth and final biker, the largest of them all, realized brute strength wasn't enough. He had to catch Keanu off guard. From behind, he reached out, trying to put Keanu into a chokehold. Big mistake. Keanu grabbed the biker's arm mid-air, his grip firm as steel. In one fluid motion, he twisted the man's wrist, shifted his weight, and flipped him clean over his shoulder. The biker hit the floor with a heavy thud, the breath knocked from his lungs before he could even react. Before the biker could move, Keanu pinned him in a joint lock, securing his arm at a painful angle. The diner was deathly silent again. The only sound was the muffled whimper of the biker, who was now completely immobilized. Keanu leaned in slightly, voice calm. "You done?" The biker gritted his teeth, eyes darting to his struggling crew members. Keanu applied the slightest pressure on the lock. A sharp yelp of pain left the biker's mouth. He frantically tapped the floor with his free hand. He was done. Keanu let go, standing up effortlessly. The biker rolled onto his side, clutching his arm, groaning in defeat. The rest of the Iron Serpents, beaten and bruised, struggled to their feet. The ones still standing helped their fallen comrades, throwing nervous glances at Keanu, who simply adjusted his jacket, looking more like he had just gone for a casual stroll than fought off an entire gang. Jade's face twisted with fury. This was supposed to be his moment. The moment where he humiliated the Hollywood pretty boy, where he established dominance in this town. Instead, he was the one who had been humiliated. "You think this is over?" Jade spat, wiping his mouth again. "You don't know who you're messing with, Reeves." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Jade's fists clenched. But he knew this wasn't the place. Not yet. Without another word, he turned toward the exit. "Get up," he growled to his gang. One by one, the battered bikers dragged themselves toward the door, their confidence shattered, their pride in pieces. But before stepping out, Jade shot Keanu a venomous glare. "This isn't over," he hissed. Keanu simply took a seat, watching as the gang limped away, their presence leaving a lingering tension in the air. The diner doors slammed shut behind them. The remaining customers, who had been holding their breath, finally exhaled. Betty, still gripping the counter for support, slowly shook her head in disbelief. "That was incredible." Keanu turned toward her, offering a small smile. "Just another night." She let out a short laugh, still trying to process what had just happened. Wordlessly, she grabbed a fresh coffee cup and filled it to the brim, sliding it over to Keanu. "On the house?" she said. Keanu took a sip, nodding in appreciation. But in the back of his mind, he knew this wasn't over. Jade wasn't the type to let things go. And something told Keanu that the Iron Serpents weren't going to walk away from this without a second attempt. For now, though, he savored the moment of quiet. The storm would come soon enough. The cool night air did little to calm Jade's burning rage as he stomped out of the diner, his gang trailing behind him like wounded dogs. The Iron Serpents weren't used to losing, and they had never been humiliated like this before. Jade's fists clenched as he paced the sidewalk, nostrils flaring. Every step he took felt like an attempt to stomp out the embarrassment twisting in his gut. His gang, still groaning from the beating they had just endured, leaned against their motorcycles, exchanging uncertain glances. No one dared to speak. No one except Jesse. The youngest member of the Iron Serpents, Jesse had joined the gang thinking it was about respect, about loyalty. But tonight, he had seen something different. He had seen Jade lose. And worse, he had seen fear in Jade's eyes, even if the leader wouldn't admit it. Jesse hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe we should let this one go, boss," he said quietly. "That guy's different." Jade snapped his head toward Jesse, his eyes filled with venom. "What did you just say?" Jesse swallowed hard. "I mean, we all saw it. That wasn't just luck in there. He wasn't panicked, he wasn't scrambling, he knew exactly what he was doing." Jade's hands curled into fists, his knuckles turning white. "So what? You scared now?" Jesse bit his lip. He wanted to say yes. He was scared. But admitting it out loud in front of the gang would be signing his own death warrant. He shook his head, choosing his words wisely. "No, but I think we need to be smart." Jade let out a short, bitter laugh. "Smart? Jesse, we don't back down from a fight. You want to be one of us, you better start acting like it." The gang mumbled in agreement, though none of them looked eager to face Keanu again. Jade exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No way we let this slide," he growled. The bikers straightened up at his words, their pride starting to override their caution. Jade wasn't just their leader, he was their symbol of strength. If they backed down now, they'd never be able to hold their heads high again. Jade smirked as he came up with a plan. "We follow him," he said, his voice dripping with cold intent. "Find out where he's staying." A few of the gang members nodded, their bruised egos demanding payback. "We wait," Jade continued. "And when he's alone, we remind him that you don't mess with the Iron Serpents." Jesse felt his stomach twist. This was a mistake, but he kept his mouth shut. The last thing he wanted was to be the next one on Jade's bad side. Jade turned to one of the gang members. "You see which way he went?" A lanky man with a busted lip nodded. "Yeah, he's headed toward the outskirts of town, probably staying at that rundown motel on Route 6. Jade's smirk widened. "Perfect." Jesse's fingers tapped nervously against the side of his jeans. "Boss," he hesitated. "You sure about this?" Jade's glare hardened. "What did I just say, Jesse?" Jesse lowered his gaze. "Nothing." Jade took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough for Jesse to hear. "You questioning me?" Jesse clenched his jaw. "No." Jade held his gaze for a moment longer before scoffing. "Good." He turned back to the rest of the gang, barking orders. "Get on your bikes. We're going to make sure that old actor learns his place." The gang wasted no time, swinging their legs over their motorcycles, the rumble of engines roaring to life. Jesse hesitated for just a second longer before following. As they peeled away from the diner, a sick feeling settled deep in his gut. This wasn't about teaching a lesson. This was about pride. And Jesse had a feeling that going after Keanu Reeves was going to be the biggest mistake the Iron Serpents had ever made. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves walked down the quiet stretch of road leading to his motel. The night was peaceful, the streetlights humming softly above him. The tension from the diner fight had faded, replaced with a familiar stillness. He had faced men like Jade before, arrogant, violent, too blinded by their own pride to know when they had lost. Keanu had spent years honing his craft, training his body and mind. He understood that real strength wasn't about who could throw the hardest punch. It was about control, precision, and knowing when to fight. Jade didn't know when to stop, and that was what made him dangerous. Keanu sighed. shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. He wasn't in the mood for another fight tonight. But something told him he wouldn't have a choice. Far behind him, barely visible through the mist rolling over the pavement, the faint glow of headlights appeared. Keanu's jaw tightened. He didn't even need to turn around to know. They were coming. And they weren't coming to talk. With measured steps, he kept walking, his mind already calculating the next move. The Iron Serpents thought they had the upper hand. They thought an ambush would scare him. But Keanu Reeves wasn't the one who should be afraid. They were about to learn that the hard way. The motel was quiet. Keanu pushed open the creaky wooden door of his room and stepped inside, letting out a slow breath. The fight at the diner had left him unsettled, not because he doubted his abilities, but because he knew men like Jade. They never walked away quietly. Shutting the door behind him, Keanu rolled his shoulders, trying to ease the tension building in his muscles. He set his bag down on the chair beside the small motel desk and reached for a bottle of water on the nightstand. The room was simple, just a bed, a nightstand, and a window overlooking the dimly lit parking lot. It wasn't luxury, but it was quiet, peaceful, or at least it was. Just as Keanu took a sip of water, the sound of roaring engines shattered the silence. He stopped mid-sip, his instincts flaring. The deep guttural rumble of motorcycles filled the air, echoing across the parking lot. The Iron Serpents had arrived. Keanu set the bottle down with a quiet thud, rolling his neck as he walked toward the door. He wasn't surprised. It was only a matter of time before Jade came looking for payback. He pushed the door open and stepped onto the wooden porch, his eyes scanning the dark lot ahead. There they were. Jade stood in the center of the lot, his leather jacket dusted from the road, his lip curled into a sneer. Flanking him were 8 bikers, their arms crossed, their boots scraping against the pavement. Their bikes idled behind them, headlights cutting through the darkness like cold knives. Keanu sighed. "Round 2, Reeves," Jade called out, his voice laced with arrogance. "You didn't think we were done, did you?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, unimpressed. "I was hoping you had more sense than this." Jade's face twitched. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." Keanu glanced at the bikers. 8 men, all bigger than him, all cocky, believing numbers would give them the upper hand. They had no idea what they were walking into. Jesse, the youngest member, stepped forward hesitantly. His hands were clenched into fists, but Keanu could see the doubt in his eyes. "Boss, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Jesse," Jade snapped. Jesse's jaw tightened, but he took a step back, his hands falling to his sides. Keanu rolled up his sleeves. "You really want to do this?" Jade grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Oh, we really do." The gang spread out, forming a loose circle around Keanu, cutting off any possible escape. Not that he needed one. Keanu didn't wait. He moved first. With a sudden burst of speed, he stepped toward the nearest biker and struck, his fingers landing against a precise nerve cluster near the man's shoulder. The biker's face twisted in confusion for half a second before his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the pavement, stunned, his arms limp at his sides. The other bikers barely had time to register what happened before Keanu pivoted, catching the next attacker mid-stride. The man swung wildly. A mistake. Keanu sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted sharply. A cry of pain erupted as Keanu yanked him forward and landed a swift, brutal knee to his ribs. The biker crumpled, gasping for air. Jade's smirk faltered. "Get him," he barked. The gang charged at once. One of them swung a steel bat. Keanu ducked, the wind from the bat slicing past his face. Before the biker could swing again, Keanu drove a precise kick into his knee, sending him toppling forward. The bat hit the ground. Keanu scooped it up, spun it in his hands, and struck. One clean hit across the attacker's midsection. The biker doubled over with a pained groan. Another man lunged from behind. Keanu caught his wrist, twisted, and used his momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The biker crashed onto the pavement with a thud, Keanu's knee pressing into his back in a firm joint lock. "You done?" Keanu asked coolly. The man whimpered, tapping the ground frantically. Keanu let him go, stepping back just in time to catch another attacker coming from the left. This one was quicker. He managed to get close enough to throw a punch. Keanu blocked effortlessly. One swift counterpunch to the solar plexus sent the man stumbling backward, coughing. Another biker grabbed a chain from his belt and whipped it forward. Keanu caught it mid-air. A sharp yank sent the attacker flying forward, and Keanu met him with a sharp elbow strike to the jaw. The man hit the ground hard and didn't get back up. Jade's confidence was unraveling. His gang, 8 men who were supposed to overwhelm Keanu, were now scattered, groaning, barely able to stand. Jade clenched his fists. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was personal. He charged. Keanu saw it coming. Jade swung with everything he had, aiming for Keanu's jaw. Keanu didn't move until the last second. Then he sidestepped. Jade's fist cut through empty air, his own momentum throwing him off balance. Keanu capitalized instantly, grabbing Jade's wrist, twisting it, and delivering a controlled but firm palm strike to his chest. Jade staggered, coughing. Keanu let go, taking a step back. "You don't have to do this," he said evenly. "Walk away." Jade wiped his mouth, fury blazing in his eyes. Like hell. He rushed forward again. Keanu sighed. This time, he ended it. Jade barely got his fist up before Keanu struck. One precise hit to the sternum sent Jade stumbling backward. Keanu stepped in, twisting Jade's arm behind his back and sweeping his legs out from under him. Jade crashed onto the pavement, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Keanu didn't move, keeping his grip firm. The fight was over. The remaining gang members, battered and bruised, exchanged uneasy glances. Jesse stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a bar fight. This was surgical. Keanu wasn't just a guy who knew how to throw a punch. He was a master. And now, Jade lay at his feet, beaten, humiliated, and struggling for air. Keanu loosened his grip and let him go. Jade groaned, rolling onto his side. Keanu took a slow step back. "You lost." Jade's fingers curled into fists, but he didn't move. He knew Keanu was right. Keanu exhaled, shaking his head. "Don't make me do this again." Jade glared up at him, his pride shattered. Keanu turned to the rest of the gang. "Take him." "Leave." The bikers hesitated. Then Jesse stepped forward. He bent down, grabbed Jade's arm, and hauled him up. "Come on, boss." Jade wavered, his body swaying. The fight had been beaten out of him. Without another word, the gang picked themselves up, limping toward their bikes. Keanu watched in silence as the Iron Serpents mounted their motorcycles and rode off into the night. Jade never looked back. Keanu let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. The night returned to silence. And just like that, it was over. Jade lay on the cold pavement, chest heaving, his pride crushed beneath the weight of his failure. His body ached from the beating Keanu had given him, but his fury burned hotter than the pain. Keanu stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed, but his sharp eyes locked onto Jade, watching for the next move. The other bikers were quiet now, shifting uncomfortably on their feet. The gang's confidence had evaporated, replaced by the unsettling realization that they had picked the wrong man to mess with. Jesse, standing near his downed leader, exhaled slowly. "Boss, it's over," he said, his voice low. "Let it go." But Jade wasn't listening. His hand twitched, his fingers curling around the cool metal of a chain lying on the pavement beside him. His breathing was ragged, his face twisted with pure hatred. No way he was walking away like this. Jade gritted his teeth and suddenly yanked the chain from the ground, the steel links rattling ominously. He whipped it once, letting it snap in the air, testing its weight. Keanu sighed. "You really want to do this?" he asked, his voice calm, even. Jade's lips curled into a sneer. "I want to watch you bleed." With a sharp movement, Jade swung the chain toward Keanu's face. Keanu reacted instantly. He sidestepped the first strike, the chain slicing through the air just inches from his head. Jade growled and swung again, this time aiming lower, but Keanu shifted his weight and weaved through the attack with effortless precision. Jade's movements were wild, fueled by rage, but Keanu's were calculated, smooth. He dodged the chain with minimal effort, stepping just outside of Jade's reach, never rushing, never panicking. "You're out of your league," Keanu said, his voice steady as he effortlessly avoided another strike. Jade's eyes darkened with fury. "Shut up and fight!" Keanu tilted his head slightly, unimpressed. Then, without warning, Jade lunged. He gripped the chain tighter and swung it overhead, bringing it down in a brutal arc, aiming to crack Keanu across the skull. Keanu moved. In a flash, he closed the distance, stepping inside Jade's reach before the chain could land. With a sharp twist of his body, Keanu grabbed Jade's wrist and used his own momentum against him. Jade's balance was thrown off instantly. Keanu's grip was iron, his movements fluid. He pivoted, executing a textbook judo throw. His hip locked against Jade's waist, and with a powerful turn, he launched him through the air. Jade hit the pavement hard. The impact sent a sickening thud through the night air. A pained groan escaped Jade's lips as he rolled onto his side, the wind knocked out of him. The chain slipped from his grasp, clattering uselessly against the ground. Silence. The gang stood frozen, eyes wide. Even Jesse let out a slow exhale, shaking his head. "Told you he was different." Keanu stood over Jade, his expression unreadable. Jade coughed, struggling to breathe, his body refusing to cooperate. Every nerve screamed in protest, but his pride wouldn't let him stay down. He planted a shaking hand against the pavement and tried to push himself up. Keanu didn't move. He simply watched. Jade barely got to his knees before his arms buckled, his strength leaving him. His forehead touched the pavement, his breaths ragged. It was over. Keanu crouched beside him, his voice low. "Stay down." Jade didn't answer. He couldn't. For the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. Keanu slowly rose to his feet, stepping back. He turned his gaze toward the rest of the gang. They were motionless, uncertain. Some looked at Jade, waiting for a command that wouldn't come. Others looked at Keanu, realizing that they had just witnessed something they would never forget. Keanu exhaled slowly. "Take him," he said, nodding toward Jade. "Get out of here." The bikers hesitated. Then finally Jesse stepped forward. He crouched down, reaching for Jade's arm. "Come on, boss." Jade tensed at the touch, but didn't resist. He had no fight left in him. Jesse helped him up, slinging one of his leader's arms over his shoulder. Jade groaned in pain but said nothing. His breathing was slow, labored. The gang, now silent, moved to help. One by one they gathered their fallen, helping their bruised and battered comrades to their feet. The energy in the air had shifted. There was no more arrogance, no more mockery, only the weight of their defeat. Jesse met Keanu's gaze one last time, nodding slightly. Keanu returned the nod. Without another word, the Iron Serpents turned toward their bikes. Engines roared to life, filling the night with deep guttural vibrations. One by one, the gang rolled out of the parking lot, disappearing down the highway. Jade, still leaning on Jesse for support, was the last to leave. For a moment, he looked back at Keanu, his face unreadable. Then he turned away and climbed onto his bike, his movements slow, pained. As the last taillight vanished into the night, silence returned. Keanu stood still, listening to the distant hum of their engines fading. The fight was over. He let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as he turned back toward the motel. The night air felt different now. Not lighter, not peaceful, just quiet. Keanu walked up the porch steps, his muscles aching, his heartbeat steady. He reached for the doorknob and paused. For a brief second, he considered the fight. The anger in Jade's eyes, the desperate way he had clung to his pride, refusing to admit defeat until his body forced him to. Keanu had seen men like Jade before. Men who lived by violence, who thrived on intimidation, who thought strength came from dominance. Tonight, Jade had learned the truth. Strength wasn't about being the loudest, or the toughest, or the most feared. Strength was about knowing when to stand, and when to walk away. Keanu opened the door, stepping inside. The room was exactly as he had left it, simple, still, untouched by the chaos outside. He let out one last breath. Then, with the soft click of the door behind him, the night closed in. The distant roar of motorcycle engines slowly faded into the night, leaving behind an eerie silence. The Iron Serpents were gone, beaten, humiliated, and carrying their broken pride with them. The motel parking lot, which had been the stage for their downfall, now felt almost peaceful in their absence. Keanu stood motionless for a few moments, listening as the last echoes of the gang's retreating bikes disappeared. He could still feel the tension in his muscles, the sharp sting of adrenaline beginning to subside. The fight was over, but something told him this night would linger in their memories far longer than any punch thrown. A slow, shuffling sound broke the silence. Jesse. Unlike the others, Jesse hadn't left. Keanu turned slightly, his gaze meeting the younger bikers. Jesse's face was a mix of uncertainty and exhaustion. He had been there for all of it, from the diner to the ambush, but unlike Jade and the others, he hadn't jumped into the fight with reckless arrogance. Instead, he had hesitated. And now, standing in the dim glow of the motel's porch light, he hesitated again. Jesse's gaze flickered to the spot where Jade had fallen, then back to Keanu. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I never wanted to be like them," Jesse admitted. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of the bravado he had tried so hard to maintain in front of his gang. Keanu studied him for a moment, then gave a rare, knowing smile. Then, Jesse let those words settle in the air. It was simple advice, but it carried the weight of something far more meaningful. The younger man looked down, scuffing the toe of his boot against the pavement. "Yeah," he murmured. "Guess it's that easy, huh?" Keanu shrugged. "Walking away is hard, but staying in something that doesn't feel right? That's harder." Jesse nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He turned his head toward the road, where his gang had disappeared, then back to Keanu. For the first time, there was no defiance in his posture, no need to prove himself. "I should go," Jesse said. His tone carried finality, but not the kind that meant returning to the Iron Serpents as the same person. He took a step backward, then paused. "Thanks." Keanu didn't say anything. He just nodded. Jesse hesitated for another second before turning away, his footsteps growing fainter as he disappeared down the road. Keanu stood there for a moment longer, watching the darkness swallow Jesse whole. And then, with a quiet sigh, he turned back toward his motel room, pushing open the door and stepping inside. By the time Keanu returned to the diner the next morning, word had already spread. The place was unusually quiet for this time of day, almost as if the walls themselves were still digesting the news. A few customers sat in their usual spots, but their conversations were hushed, their eyes flickering toward Keanu the moment he stepped through the door. He didn't react. He simply walked toward his usual table in the corner, nodding at Betty as she moved behind the counter. Betty, for her part, shook her head, an incredulous smile tugging at her lips. "Never thought I'd see the day someone humbled Jade." Keanu sat down, his expression neutral as he reached for the menu. "Some lessons are painful." Betty snorted, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee before sliding it across the counter. "Yeah, I'd say getting slammed into the pavement by a Hollywood actor is probably pretty high on the list of painful lessons." Keanu lifted the cup, taking a slow sip. The warmth spread through his fingers, grounding him. "I didn't teach him anything he didn't already know," he finally said. Betty raised an eyebrow. "You broke half his ribs." Keanu shrugged. "He'll heal." She folded her arms, leaning against the counter. "And if he doesn't learn from this?" Keanu set his coffee down, his gaze steady. "That's up to him." There was a brief silence. Betty tapped her nails against the counter, considering his words. Then she let out a small chuckle, shaking her head again. "You're something else, Reeves," she muttered. "Hollywood's biggest star, sitting in my diner like nothing happened." Keanu smirked. "Just another night." Betty rolled her eyes and grabbed her notepad. "Yeah, well, if you're planning to throw another biker gang through my furniture, at least let me know, so I can charge them extra." Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll keep that in mind." She scribbled down his order before heading to the kitchen, still grinning. As Keanu sat in his corner booth, sipping his coffee, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about Jesse, the only one of the bikers who had shown hesitation, who had questioned the path he was on. Maybe Jesse would go back to the gang. Maybe he wouldn't. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Jade, on the other hand, would either learn from this or keep walking the same path until he ran into someone who wouldn't stop at just breaking his pride. Keanu had seen men like him before. They burned fast and bright, and more often than not, they burned out completely. He exhaled, feeling the last remnants of tension slip away. The world outside the diner carried on as if nothing had happened. The sun rose, casting golden light across the pavement. Cars passed by. People went about their day, unaware of the small war that had taken place just hours before. Keanu picked up his cup, rolling his shoulders slightly. Strength wasn't about throwing the hardest punch or winning every fight. Strength was about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And as far as Keanu was concerned, he had already won. Days had passed since the brawl at the motel, but the memory of it still lingered in the air, like the fading scent of rain after a storm. Keanu Reeves walked down the quiet streets of the small town, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, enjoying the peace that had settled over the place. The usual unease that had clung to the sidewalks and storefronts, an invisible tension born from the Iron Serpents' presence, was gone. It was subtle, but noticeable. People no longer darted their eyes toward the horizon, expecting trouble. Conversations carried a lighter tone. Laughter was easier, more natural. The Iron Serpents had left. Not a single motorcycle had been spotted since that night. Keanu didn't know exactly what had happened within their ranks after Jade's defeat, but he didn't need to. He had seen men like Jade before, men who ruled by fear until that fear turned to doubt. The moment their power was questioned, they lost everything. Jade had lost everything that night. Now the town could finally breathe again. As Keanu made his way toward the diner, he noticed how different the place felt. The last time he had walked through these streets, the Iron Serpents had been parked outside, their presence poisoning the air. But now, the parking lot was empty. No more crude laughter, no more harassment, just silence, the way it should have been all along. The moment Keanu stepped inside the diner, he was met with a different kind of silence, one filled with anticipation. Heads turned, conversations paused. A few customers exchanged glances as if confirming that yes, this was really happening. Then from behind the counter, Betty grinned. Well, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Look what the wind blew back in." Keanu smirked, making his way to the counter. "Miss me?" Betty scoffed. "Please, I get more peace and quiet when you're gone." But there was warmth in her voice, and Keanu could tell she was relieved to see him. She grabbed a fresh coffee mug and placed it in front of him, already reaching for the pot. "Free coffee for the town's hero?" Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Hero?" Betty poured the coffee, shaking her head. "You ran a whole gang out of town. If that doesn't make you a hero, I don't know what does." Keanu picked up the mug, letting the warmth seep into his hands. "I'm no hero." Betty smirked. "Tell that to everyone else." As Keanu sipped his coffee, the diner returned to life. Conversations picked up, but the energy was different. Lighter, safer. Then a small voice broke through the hum of chatter. "Are you really that strong?" Keanu turned to see a young boy standing a few feet away, eyes wide with curiosity. His hands were curled into fists at his sides, mimicking the posture of a fighter. Keanu chuckled, setting his cup down. "Depends on what you mean by strong." The boy hesitated, then asked, Could you beat up more guys if they came back? Keanu studied him for a moment, then shook his head. That's not what strength is about. The boy frowned. It's not? Keanu leaned forward slightly. Strength isn't about winning fights. It's about knowing when to walk away. The boy's expression shifted as he absorbed the words. He looked up at Keanu as if trying to understand something much bigger than himself. But you didn't walk away, the boy pointed out. Keanu smiled. That's because some fights are worth standing for. The boy nodded slowly, as if storing the lesson away for another day. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his seat. Keanu picked up his coffee again, taking a slow sip. He had a feeling that kid would remember this conversation for a long time. As the morning stretched on, Keanu sat in the diner, watching the world outside. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft streaks of orange and gold. The quiet hum of the town carried on, undisturbed. No more threats, no more fear, just life, moving forward. And that was enough. Keanu knew he had done the right thing. Not because he had won a fight, not because he had humiliated Jade, but because he had helped restore something that had been taken from this town: peace. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The dust had settled, and the town had reclaimed its peace. The Iron Serpents were gone, their reign of intimidation shattered in a single night. But the lesson that remained was far more lasting than any fight. Strength isn't just about power, it's about control. Keanu Reeves had faced men like Jade before, men who mistook violence for strength, who thought that fear equated to respect. But fear fades, and respect, earned through force, crumbles the moment someone stronger comes along. What Keanu had shown wasn't brute force. It wasn't aggression. It was discipline, mastery, absolute control. He never sought the fight. He never raised his fists out of arrogance or anger. He only acted when he needed to, when there was something worth protecting. And that was the real difference between him and Jade. As Keanu sat in the diner, sipping his coffee, he thought about everything that had unfolded. Jade had come at him with everything: intimidation, mockery, outright violence. And yet, in the end, it was Jade who had been left lying on the pavement, breathless, humiliated, and forced to face the truth. Strength isn't about proving something. It isn't about crushing others beneath your feet. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And sometimes it's about teaching others that their path is the wrong one. That was the gift Keanu had given Jesse, the young biker who had watched it all unfold. Jesse had a choice to make, and thanks to Keanu, he had been given the opportunity to see a different way forward. That was the true victory. Respect is never taken, it's given. Jade had tried to take it, forcing people to fear him, believing that fear was the same as power. But in the end, Keanu had taught him the ultimate lesson. Respect is earned through character, not control. The town didn't celebrate Keanu because he had fought. They celebrated him because he had fought the right way. With skill, with precision, without unnecessary violence. Even as he stood victorious, Keanu had given Jade a choice: to walk away or to lose again. And in doing so, he allowed Jade to keep his dignity, even in defeat. Jade may have left humiliated, but deep down, Keanu knew that part of him had changed. Because a man who only knows violence will never understand respect until he's shown a better way. Not every fight needs to happen. Not every challenge needs to be met with fists. That's what Keanu had told the young boy in the diner, the one who had asked if he was really that strong. Strength isn't just about winning. It's about knowing when to walk away. Jade had forced Keanu into the fight, but even then, Keanu had controlled every moment of it. He never lashed out in anger. He never lost his composure. Even after winning, he hadn't gloated, hadn't sought revenge. Because true warriors don't need to prove anything. That was the message. And the boy who had asked that question would carry that lesson for years to come. Because in that moment, Keanu wasn't just teaching the bikers a lesson. He was teaching everyone. The world is full of people like Jade, people who mistake cruelty for strength, who use intimidation as a weapon. And there are people like Jesse, people who are still figuring out their path, who just need to see another way. Then there are people like Keanu, people who understand that true strength is not about hurting others, but about knowing when to stand up and when to step back. It's not about fists. It's about control, about honor. Keanu Reeves didn't just win a fight that night. He changed lives. And that's the kind of strength that lasts. If this story inspired you, if you believe in strength with honor, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this story with others. Join us for more inspiring content. Your support keeps us going. Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about standing for what's right. Let's share that message with the world.